Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizengauzen. Today is November 5th, and we have a lot of important news to cover. In this episode, Ukraine destroys Russian Iskanders. In Russia, not only drones are now targeting major substations, a blackout for Russians is not that far off. A unique operation by a Ukrainian medical battalion, 64 kilometers of hell, and a soldier saved by a robot. I'll show you this video today. Putin compared himself to a Romanov and recalled the war with Poland. We defeated the Poles back then and will defeat them now. Putin's strange historical flashbacks. And now it turns out he has a new mission for Russia. But most importantly, he forgot to mention those troubled times. And we'll talk about that in today's episode as well. The Kremlin's chief sociologist warns of a civil war inside Russia. Meanwhile, in Sudan, a Russian Il-76 military transport plane was mysteriously shot down across, hit by a Chinese missile. This and more. There will be a lot of interesting things in today's episode, especially if you're new to the channel. Subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Let's start with some great news. Special Operations Forces struck a transport loading vehicle from an Iskander missile crew and also hit a radar station that was on combat duty in the Kursk region. For those of you from Ukraine, I'm not going to explain anything. You already know very well what it means to destroy Iskanders. But for those who aren't from Ukraine, I want to explain why this is so important to us, why every time it really feels like, wow, that's a target. As soon as an air raid siren goes off in Ukraine, most Ukrainians immediately check their phones, open apps, and look up what kind of alert it is, and most importantly, the reason for it. For example, it could be a threat of a drone attack. In that case, the alert is activated in the region where the drones are headed. It could be the threat of Kinzhal aeroballistic missiles when a MiG-31 takes off, and then the alert is triggered across all of Ukraine. Without exception, every region turns red and sirens wail everywhere because a Kinzhal missile can reach its target in just a few seconds, or at most a few minutes. And in frontline cities, it could be guided aerial bombs, which also arrive very quickly, but probably one of the most unpleasant types of alerts is when the sirens blare and a ballistic missile warning is issued. Usually they specify which region it's coming from: Kursk, Bryansk, Voronezh, or somewhere else, even Crimea. In other words, where the ballistic missile is being launched from. Why is it so unpleasant? Because when there's a threat from drones or cruise missiles, you can prepare, you have some time, you more or less know when they'll arrive, and you can go to a shelter. But with a ballistic missile threat, running to a shelter only makes sense if you're Usain Bolt, the multiple world champion in short distance running. So you hear the sound of the siren, you check the alert, and it says there's a ballistic missile threat from the Kursk region. A few seconds later, a message appears: high-speed target. After that, they might list Chernihiv, Sumy, Kiev, and so on. In other words, within the same minute, there could be a message saying that a strike has already occurred. That's why it's the most unpleasant. There's nowhere to run. You don't have time, and you just sit there thinking, just please not here. That's basically why it's so unpleasant. Honestly, any alert is unpleasant. That's why every time they hit Iskander launch sites, it's really, really great news. I hope that in the near future there won't be any ballistic alerts coming from the Kursk region, but that's not all. Recently, drones struck an important power plant in Oriol, a CHP plant, meaning that in response to Russians attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure, we decided to show them that this is not the way to do things. So literally just a couple of days ago, drones hit the Oriol CHP plant, and today, to reinforce the success, so to speak, missiles struck there as well. And also regarding the Vladimirskaya substation in the city of Vladimir, which has been attacked twice recently, our drones continue to systematically strike the power lines that Moscow depends on. By the way, this Vladimirskaya substation is the most powerful energy facility in the Vladimir region. It is important for maintaining the stability of the region's power supply, and a bit more. Drones also struck 2 oil pumping stations in the Yaroslavl region. Well, these oil pumping stations are located all along the pipeline. They work like pumps, pumping oil further along the line. So, if these stations are put out of commission, the oil can no longer be pumped further. That is, you can strike at the ports, and that's the right thing to do. And now there will be another piece of news on this topic, but you can also put these stations out of commission. Well, as they say, the oil terminal in the port of Tuapse, which was recently hit by Ukrainian drones, has suspended its operations. Burned out on the job? This is very good news, because hitting oil exports is very painful for Putin. Very painful. Right before our eyes, exports are dropping, literally within the span of 1 week. So that's the kind of harvest Ukrainian drones and Ukrainian missiles have reaped today. So huge thanks to everyone who is imposing these direct fiery sanctions. Well, now friends, there will be a rather unusual story. Remember, we finished raising funds for 2 ground-based robotic mall evacuators for the 1st separate medical battalion? And back then, my acquaintance from this battalion, Volodya, wrote to me that they recently carried out a unique operation using this ground-based unmanned evacuator. They evacuated a soldier who had been wounded and stuck at his position for over 30 days. They couldn't get him out of there in any way. Everything was under fire. And now, a video of this evacuation has appeared, along with some additional details. And it's simply incredible. First, take a look at this video. And now a few details. For 3 days after suffering a severe wound and having a tourniquet applied, our soldier remained at his position. He was evacuated from a settlement that was under enemy control. A sergeant stayed with him and said, "I won't leave him." The total length of the evacuation route was 64 kilometers. This ground evacuation vehicle with an armored capsule covered 37 of those kilometers on a damaged wheel. The mission lasted 5 hours and 58 minutes, with an average speed of 13 kilometers per hour, and at its fastest, the evacuation vehicle reached about 30 kilometers per hour. During the evacuation, the vehicle was damaged by an anti-personnel mine, but it was able to continue moving on the damaged wheel. It was also targeted by drone-dropped munitions. But overall, thanks to the armored capsule, our soldier was not harmed, and in the end he received the necessary medical assistance. And the 1st Medical Battalion wrote that if the soldier did not surrender, we had no right to surrender. But I think, listen, just seeing a video like this is simply incredible, and realizing that we are involved in this, that is, maybe this is the very mall we were raising funds for, well, it's not clear if it's that one or not, but it doesn't matter. It's ours, the one we collected for, and now it's being used to rescue other soldiers. It's just something unbelievable to be part of saving a life. I always tell you, thank you so much. You are simply an incredible force. And now, our regular segment, how not to end up at the psychiatrists when you're lifting Russia off its knees. The Kremlin has stated that, according to them, NATO is rehearsing a scenario of blockading the Kaliningrad region during its exercises. NATO is rehearsing a scenario of blockading the Kaliningrad region. I get the feeling that in the Kremlin they've strictly forbidden the use of maps. Just look at the map there in the Kremlin. Kaliningrad region, de facto. There you go. Is already blocked in between NATO countries. Poland is here, Lithuania is here, the Baltic Sea is here, and there are NATO countries there too. It's simply surrounded. There's no need to blockade it. It's already geographically blockaded by NATO countries. How else could they possibly blockade it? They could cut off transit through Lithuania, but you don't need NATO troops for that. So they didn't even bother to check where their Kaliningrad region is located. Everyone wants to, well, Russians think everyone wants to attack Russia. Everyone wants our riches. Look, theoretically, Russia has a pretty decent stock of natural resources. And maybe someone would want to attack and take all of that for themselves. But let me remind you, Russia is a nuclear state. And secondly, why spend a ton of money on war like Putin does? And why throw the healthy population of your own country into the meat grinder of this war? If, as Wooland from the novel The Master and Margarita said, they'll offer it up themselves and hand everything over willingly. Just like they're now crawling on their knees before China, before India. So that those countries will keep buying their oil at a huge discount and save the bankrupt Gazprom. And here's a recent bit of news, just to make it clear that the old man doesn't just have a split personality anymore. It's more like a full-blown personality disorder. Russia threatens no one and seeks friendship with all the peoples of the world, Putin declared on Unity Day. Just yesterday, with all the peoples of the world. Well, that's what Putin said on National Unity Day. Pay attention. Do you know at what moment? When he was awarding the developers of the Burevestnik missile and that nuclear Poseidon torpedo. But at the very moment he's waging war in Ukraine, he says that Russia threatens no one and seeks friendship with all the peoples of the world. With the whole galaxy, even, he seeks friendship. In recent weeks, Russian state channels have been running non-stop programs about how Sarmat, Poseidon, and then there's Oreshnik, Pelmeshnik, Pureshnik, they'll wipe everything off the face of the earth. Absolutely everything except Russia, of course. Russia, no one. Burevestnik and Sarmat don't affect Russia, it turns out, but they don't exist. They don't work. They'll wipe out the hated West, turn it into radioactive ash, create a nuclear tsunami off the coast of Great Britain. All of this is being broadcast on official Russian channels. That's the extent of their imagination. And at this moment, Putin says we don't want to fight anyone, we don't want to attack anyone. Do I have any psychiatrists among my subscribers? What is the correct name for this disorder? Please write it in the comments. The head of NATO's military committee stated that Putin has suffered a strategic defeat in Ukraine. Putin was unable to achieve his goals in Ukraine. Moreover, this war has become his strategic failure, stated the chairman of NATO's military committee, Admiral Giuseppe Cavodragone, in an interview with the BBC. He recalled that the 2022 invasion of Ukraine led to the expansion of the North Atlantic Alliance. Finland and Sweden joined NATO. Finland now shares an additional 1,300 kilometers of border with NATO with Russia. And yet, when Putin announced the start of this war, he said he would not allow NATO's military machine to approach Russia's borders. But who asked you? Asks the bald Medusa. NATO has moved closer, and there's nothing you can do about it. Every time I try to understand how Russians want to turn this situation, where Putin is now, in the depths of this rubber box, how they want to make a victory out of it, what propaganda tells them is one thing, absolutely. Yes, we won, we prevailed, and so on. What will Russia get out of this war? Propaganda tells them that Putin has protected Russia. Or they'll say, not a single NATO soldier's boot set foot on our land. Putin protected Russia. From whom? Who attacked you on February 22nd? Who? Russian tanks are crossing the border between Russia and Ukraine in this direction, heading toward Kyiv, moving through Chernihiv and Kharkiv. From the Belarusian side, Russian troops and tanks are also entering, with columns advancing as well. They are coming in from that side, and moreover, they are moving toward Kyiv. For some time, let me just remind you, in case anyone has forgotten, especially Russians, they were stationed right outside Kyiv for a while. So after that, Putin's forces take a heavy beating, an extremely heavy one. The columns were just standing there, several dozen pieces of equipment all burned out along the Zhytomyr highway. Well, anyone who's traveled there has seen it. Basically, they flee from there, rushing through the Red Forest, through Chernobyl, escaping to Belarus, loaded with stolen goods. Some of them flee toward Chernihiv, toward the border with Russia. Some run back to Russia itself. In short, after getting smacked on his bald head, Putin retreats far back, very far. And by this point, he's already lost over 1 million Russians. You remember what they were saying back then, right? That they wanted to liberate Donbass. Have any of you seen, just Google what Bakhmut and Avdiivka look like now? Marinka, Soledad, Toretsk, Chasiv Yar. Just Google it. Find people from there. I think it's not hard. And ask them, this pile of bricks that used to be Avdiivka, is that your town? Did you want to be liberated like this? Go ahead and ask, but they're afraid they'll say no and so on. They definitely didn't want this. Just scorched ruins. And most importantly, no one is planning to rebuild them. Don't kid yourself. Putin can't even fix your schools in Russia. Right there in Russia itself, ceilings are collapsing, walls are crumbling. This has happened in several Russian schools just in the past month. So what kind of restoration of the burned out Donbass are we talking about? And those weren't even the cringiest moments from this Unity Day. Honestly, there was just some kind of madness going on there. Representatives and leaders of various religious denominations, all in their church robes and turbans, were standing there with Putin. How is it that no one feels uneasy standing by the monument to Minin and Pozharsky? There were these kids standing there so little but already wearing some kind of berets. Young Army, some unit called Young Warrior. Basically like little larvae of SVO soldiers and so on. What? And so all these religious leaders are standing there, everyone smiling, Putin in the center, and behind him Patriarch Kirill with his antenna, supposedly receiving FSB messages. No one there feels even a twinge of conscience. So basically, Putin gave a speech on Unity Day. Symbolically, he gave it at the very bottom. I mean, Putin made the following statement. This, I think is the key point. At this moment, he revealed and showed who he really is, and most importantly, who he associates himself with. Buckle up. Some of you might get scared, some might feel creeped out, and some might even find it funny. Putin stated that Russia, even today, just like in 1612, is defending its sovereignty. Let's start with the fact that the illness is progressing, yes, and he still imagines himself as the liberator of Russia, actively drawing parallels with historical events. Apparently the balding muskrat has gotten a bit too carried away with rewritten history. Previously, he compared himself to Peter the Great, saying that Russia under him now, just like in Peter the Great's time, is defending and reclaiming, such a restorer. Here, he even recalled for himself the role of the founder of the Romanov dynasty. The most interesting thing is, what does he actually mean when he says that Russia today, like in 1612, is defending its sovereignty? He puts a special meaning into these words. This speech is actually about the so-called Time of Troubles, which lasted from 1598 to 1613, when in Moscow, events unfolded like a blockbuster. The Rhetoric dynasty came to an end. After the deaths of Tsar Fyodor and Tsarevich Dmitry, under mysterious circumstances, a fierce struggle for power began. I think that in Alaska, Putin was actually trying to tell Trump about the Rhetoric dynasty, specifically about that period. Trump basically told him to get lost. According to eyewitnesses, he even raised his voice at him. So, what happened back then? At that time, I think the people of the land greatly angered the Almighty, especially those living in the territory of Russia. There were uprisings, foreign interventions, and severe famine. So it's an interesting point. Right when all these uprisings were happening, when false Dmitry the First, Second, Third, however many there were, it's not even clear. From 1601 to 1603, the so-called Little Ice Age began on Earth. This is no joke, it's a real historical fact. Frosts would hit as early as July or August, just imagine that, and snow would fall at the beginning of autumn. There was practically no warmth for 3 years, no harvest, an absolutely brutal famine, and naturally widespread discontent. The population began to riot, uprisings broke out, and things kept escalating. In fact, this anomaly happened because in Peru, there was an eruption of the Huayna Putina volcano, or Voina Putina, which sounds odd. This was a powerful eruption, about a 6 on the scale, and it caused a significant accumulation of ash in the atmosphere, leading to a sharp drop in temperatures. For 3 years, this ash blocked sunlight from reaching the earth, and because of that, there were these early frosts. Just imagine, in August, the frosts were already hitting, and then things really took off. The appearance of false Dmitry IV, who was placed on the throne and then killed, false Dmitry II, false Dmitry III, the rule of the 7 boyars, a profound political crisis. The boyar families were competing with the central government. In general, it was chaos. Why did Putin recall this period? Because at that time the Poles decided it was time to take Moscow, since things there were just out of control, and the Polish king decided to put his own son on the throne. He wanted to seize the opportunity while things were hot. It was total lawlessness there. So they took one of the false Dimitris and said, let's go, we'll put him on the throne, and if that doesn't work, we'll put the Polish king's son there. So, according to the official version of Russian history, Minin and Pozharsky appear a local oligarch and a prince, and they gather some kind of people's militia, march on Moscow, drive the Polish troops out of the city, and declare, now everything will be ours. And then they put Mikhail Romanov on the throne, the very person with whom Putin associates himself. And Putin says, just like back then, Russia is now also repelling the enemy. Are you out of your mind or what? Who is aiming for your bald throne now? First, you barged into another country, tried to do something there, it didn't work out, and now you're trying to back out. What kind of national unity are you talking about? By the way, right now they're trying to replace these narratives with the idea of national unity. There are also a lot of questions about that people's militia, how it was assembled, and where the money for it came from. Well, anyway, if you dig deeper, I'm not going to. Believe me, most Russians, by the way, don't even know their own history. Just ask them who Minin and Pozharsky were. Oh yeah, the people of unity, and that's it. Actually, that's partly because the Soviet model of teaching history was just really strange. I went to school, and I remember we had to memorize all these dates for some reason. When did Peter I rule? I don't know. When was Catherine? When was serfdom abolished? Give me a logical sequence. Give me the whole story of the false Dimitris. How they, killed the little false Dimitri, the real Dimitri. That's what kids find interesting. Well, maybe not so bloody, of course. Although kids play such games these days that we'd be pretty shocked, honestly. Anyway, what does Putin's phrase really mean when he says that Russia now carries a new mission? The idea of the Russian world has failed, but now they need a patriotic myth about the time of troubles. So now Russia is a besieged fortress with enemies everywhere. But back then we defeated everyone, and now we'll defeat everyone again. That's what he's talking about. That's what it means. Just take away that folder with the ribbons from him, the one he keeps waving at everyone. Like, here are the Ruri kids, and here's this, and here we won. Just take it away from him. Send that old man somewhere far away. Let the world finally breathe easy. So it's the archetype of the besieged fortress. That's it. And Russians don't care. Russians just don't care. Recently, I saw an article in some Western media suggesting that Putin wants to pass his power on as an inheritance. See, he's already starting to push that narrative. Like back then, a dynasty. He plans to rule until 2050 and then hand over power to one of his sons. To Ivan, apparently, the eldest one. It's no coincidence he was discussing with Xi Jinping how they could live to be 150 years old. By the way, if we're drawing historical parallels, then Minin and Pozharsky's march on Moscow, where the enemy was entrenched, is better compared to Prigozhin's march on Moscow. That's who made Putin pack up all the suitcases in the area back then. Oh, I remember how the business jets were flying out of Moscow at that time. Prigozhin is coming. That's your Minin and Pozharsky right there. And really, people greeted them with pies, with flowers. That's who. By the way, this idea should really be promoted. And as for Putin, is like the era of Boris Godunov's rule. Putin is exactly about that. Got himself into an unsuccessful war with the Swedes. By the way, that's one of the reasons why the time of troubles happened, which, by the way, awaits Russia after this inglorious war in Ukraine, an adventurous war with Sweden that Godunov started. Enormous resources were spent. He wanted to gain access to the Baltic Sea, but got nothing. He got a few scraps of what is now Karelia, and that's it. And the treasury was empty, and a lot of people died. There you have it. Isn't that Putin? Isn't that his image? He started a stupid, senseless war, achieved nothing, and at first deliberately listed all these achievements. In my opinion, that's him. But Russians will swallow it all. So Russia is really facing a new time of troubles. Only this time it won't be the 7 boyars, but something like the 7 Kadyrovs and other such delights. Strangely enough, even the Kremlin's own court sociologists have started talking about this, that Russia is facing a time of troubles. The Kremlin's chief sociologist has announced the threat of civil war in Russia. And what makes you think that? Maybe he's read history, unlike Putin. A civil war could break out in Russia due to accumulated social, economic, and political conflicts, warned Alexander Karichev, head of the Presidential Directorate for Monitoring and Analysis of Social Processes. There is such a person. And besides, that's not all that threatens Russia. There are other challenges as well. The loss of political, territorial, and cultural sovereignty. Depopulation. Thanks to Putin for that, he already deserves a certificate for this depopulation. The loss of citizens' trust in the authorities, the collapse of the political system, as well as the dehumanization and transformation of Russians into mere consumers. Let's be honest, dehumanization has already happened to Russians a long time ago. And this Karichev said that such a society needs to be created, with the help of the ideology of "we don't abandon our own," which will be based on our own civilizational code. What are you talking about? What kind of civilizational code is that? Steal, kill, get drunk. These are the three pillars on which most Russians who support Putin stand, maybe even all of them. And this Karichev, said that it is urgent to pass a law on patriotic education, which will obligate all government bodies and educational institutions, all state structures, to instill the appropriate attitudes in citizens. In other words, there will be programming everywhere. Well, there's the national messenger Max, the Orthodox messenger Zosima, various government service portals, and so on and so forth. Conversations about important things at school with children, the young army, children's camps, millions and millions of kids are already being reprogrammed somewhere. So that's how it is. By the way, the standards for how to properly raise children have already been adopted there. And just imagine, this is a political scientist, a Kremlin court political scientist. According to him, child-free and LGBT propaganda leads to a demographic pit and the destruction of our people. As a response to this challenge, he suggested popularizing family values and making large families fashionable. Now here I have bad news for Russians. Lately they're being told from every possible source that they should have lots of children, that having a large family is a good thing. Putin needs new soldiers, well, to put it simply. But just talking about it on TV or on some radio station isn't going to make people have more kids. In other words, to achieve that, the living conditions of Russians need to change a little. Have you ever wondered why in poor countries the number of children per family is much higher than in countries with a higher standard of living? Well, it would seem obvious, right? There are many reasons, but there are three main ones. Why do people have so many children in poor countries? First, poverty, oddly enough. Have more children and you'll have more helpers. You don't count on old age, everyone will help, bring you a glass of water, and so on and so forth. The lack of education, especially for women, is the second pillar, so that a woman doesn't think about studying, doesn't think about building a career, and then she might start to wonder whether it's necessary or not. And so that from the youngest possible age, as soon as she can, she gives birth. If she doesn't pursue a career, doesn't study, that's exactly how it happens. So the lack of education and the intense propaganda from the church, in other words, society needs to be as religious as possible. These are the three main pillars. And the fourth pillar is a very low pension in old age, so that there is no financial security, no social protection. Children are born precisely so that if you have 8, maybe 2 of them will at least give you a little money. Well, maybe not everyone will manage, but that's the idea. So that's why this is bad news for Russians, because soon you will be placed in exactly these conditions. In other words, poverty is already waiting for you after the war. No one will help Russia rebuild. The lack of education, well, making those who vote for Putin even dumber is a tough task for me to imagine, but they might try to make people even dumber, though I don't know how. But as for cutting pensions and social security, that's something they can easily do. We'll have to tighten our belts, and on TV, they'll start telling us again how to make beautiful new wedding shoes out of 2 plastic bottles. Do you remember that show? How to make a Napoleon cake out of roots and birch bark. That's what you'll be dealing with. And there's another piece of news that really struck me, and I find it extremely interesting. In Sudan, rebels shot down an IL-76 military transport plane. The entire crew was Russian. All Russians on board were killed. The plane was likely shot down using a Chinese FK-2000 missile system. This was reported by Defense Blog. It was shot down on November 4th. And let me remind you that in October 2024, another Russian Il-76 plane was also shot down, with Russian citizens among the crew. At that time, I did a report about that plane. There was some completely reckless adventurer who flew it, gathered a crew, and almost bought this plane in Ukraine long before the war. He overhauled it, assembled it, and used it to smuggle contraband and weapons. Instead of a full crew, it was almost just him and an assistant sitting there. So in general, it's quite an interesting story. That's the one that was shot down. And what's interesting and why this news seemed important to me, since 2017, the Wagner PMC has been operating in Sudan. It might go by a different name now, but it's still operating. They support one of the sides in the conflict. The main motive for Russia's presence is to gain access to resources, to make money, gold, uranium, diamonds. They've got everything there. And it seemed to me that if the rebels were to shoot down another Russian Il-76, the one that recently delivered air defense systems and more to Maduro's regime, not just against the United States, that would really be something. Just imagine, what if they shoot one down in the near future, and those planes will be flying there now? First, Maduro needs to receive weapons, and second, to send gold, diamonds, gems, everything acquired through such hard work. So we can expect some interesting news coming from that region. Friends, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Subscribe to this channel. Wishing us all a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.